Okay, well, we have a very packed agenda today. We're joined by three fantastic speakers. So we're going to kick things off. Our three speakers today are Suzanne Kaye, Dr. Silke Cresswell, and Chef Darren Clay. So our first speaker today is Suzanne Kaye, who's a registered dietitian and has a Master of Nutritional Science from the University of Guelph and has over 16 years of experience working in a variety of community and acute care settings. So she's going to be our first speaker, and I'm going to pass things off to Suzanne.
So I am here to talk about nutrition for brain health, which is a very big and exciting topic, the power of food to help you age well. Like I said, it's a big topic. I'm going to do my best to stick to the 15 minutes and give you some key information. All right. Okay. So this is my outline. I want to touch briefly on what is brain health, talk about what does declining brain health look like, what causes a declining brain health, and what diets and specific foods can help optimize brain health and or prevent decline. Okay, so according to the WHO, good brain health is a state in which an individual can realize their own abilities and optimize their cognitive, emotional, psychological, and behavioral functioning. According to the British Medical Journal, this involves at least 3 broad functions of the brain: interpretation of senses and control of movement, maintenance of cognitive, mental, and emotional processes, and maintenance of normal behavior and social cognition. So that being said, what does declining brain health look like? Well, the brain is super complex, as we all know. So there are actually many ways that declining brain health can present itself. It could just look like a chronic, slow degeneration over a period of years as one ages, leading to varying levels of cognitive impairment. It could present as a frank diagnosis of Alzheimer's or some other type of dementia. It could involve a stroke or other brain injury and the complex things that happen after that, both healing and degeneration. It could be something like Parkinson's disease or progressive supranuclear palsy. It could be an autoimmune condition like multiple sclerosis, or it could be a mood disorder like depression or anxiety. So it can look like a lot of different things. And
Suzanne, sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering if you could get a little closer to your microphone. It's a little bit difficult to hear you.
Oh, okay. My microphone's right here. So is that better at all?
That's better.
Because I can just hold it here. Don't mind
Perfect,
how it looks,
if that's okay.
Yeah, I can do that. So I think to answer the question, what can we do to optimize brain health, we have to ask the question, what causes a decline in brain health to begin with? So just like I said, the answer can be super complex and actually it can be simplified at the same time. So just as there are many ways that declining brain health can show itself, there can be many factors and many pathways involved in that decline, the process is just really complex and can look different for different people. So that's the complexity involved. But at the same time, it can be simplified in the sense that all those pathways and processes end in a common denominator or common point, and this is inflammation, specifically brain inflammation. So I just wanted to spend a moment talking about inflammation because it's such a fundamental sort of root cause that we need to keep in the back of our minds. So I created this slide to just try and show inflammation kind of as a center point. And then on the outsides of the screen, you'll just see all the different things that can potentially contribute to a body's state of inflammation. So you'll see genetics, for example, autoimmune conditions, you'll see gut health up there in the corner, you'll see diet and other lifestyle factors like stress and sleep, smoking and physical activity. You see obesity in there, as well as chronic conditions like blood sugar or blood pressure issues. All of these things have the yellow arrows pointing in towards inflammation, which basically indicates they can all be contributing and driving factors to that body's state of inflammation. Then you see the red arrows coming out from the inflammation, going down to the bottom of the slide. The one going to the right shows that the body's state of inflammation can have effects on all sorts of non-brain tissue. It can create a state of insulin resistance, for example, or even frank diabetes. It can cause blood vessel damage, and over time lead to things like heart disease. And then the arrow going to the left side shows that the inflammation state of the body can also have direct effects on the brain cell inflammation and give you that inflamed brain, which then leads to the decline in the brain health. You can also see the arrow going between the boxes at the bottom, showing that the body's state of inflammation can also amplify the brain's state of inflammation. Okay, so I just wanted to touch briefly then, now that we know that inflammation is kind of the driving force that we're looking at, on the 6 pillars of brain health. This is according to the Cleveland Clinic in the US, and it's based on the most current research that we have of what we know about all the things that affect brain health. So you can see there we've got physical activity, sleep and stress management, control of medical conditions, mental engagement and fitness, in other words, how often you use and challenge your brain, social engagement and interaction, also found to be very important for maintaining brain health over time. And then last but certainly not least, you've got diet and nutrition. And all of these, as you can probably remember from the previous slide, can probably affect your inflammatory state at some level. So that being said, let's move on to the diet piece. So I want to see what the research, or I want to go over what the research says about diets that optimize brain health. So most of the research on overall dietary patterns so far has focused on 3 diets. They're the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, and the MIND diet. The MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean and DASH diet. I'll touch briefly as well on the ketogenic diet because some research also exists on the effects of this diet on brain health, more so with respect to symptom improvement where chronic conditions already exist. So for example, epilepsy, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's have been looked at. Not quite as much in the sense of like the long-term following this type of diet and does it prevent the overall decline that happens with aging. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So we're going to start with the Mediterranean, DASH, and MIND diets. Not every study has found benefit, but there are definitely a growing number that are showing positive benefits for brain health from these eating styles and patterns. Evidence exists for various measures of memory and cognition, as well as Alzheimer's risk, Parkinson's development and progression, cognitive decline after stroke, and even things like depression. The studies do vary in design and length, and this can probably partly explain the differing results. For example, some studies look at the past diet that a person followed and compare it to like their current state, whereas other studies will prescribe a specific diet and then follow for a period of time moving forward and then look at what happens over time. To date, the strongest evidence seems to be for the MIND diet. The research on that is a little bit newer. Yeah, so I'm going to focus on what the MIND diet looks like moving forward since the evidence is strong for that. And it is kind of a combination of all 3 eating patterns anyways. So it's believed that these diets act to reduce inflammation, going back to that root cause that I mentioned. So in other words, they're anti-inflammatory. And this is both because of the things that they provide in abundance, as well as the things that they limit. And it's believed that they have cumulative anti-inflammatory and therefore protective effects over a period of years. And of note, these diets have also been studied and found to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, presumably with the same anti-inflammatory mechanisms. So it makes sense that they would benefit your brain health as well. So what does the MIND diet look like? How should we be eating? So what the researchers did to develop the MIND diet was they looked at the foods that were included on the Mediterranean and the DASH diets, and they focused on the ones that had research related specifically to brain health, and then decided on intake recommendations for those foods specifically. This included foods with benefits for brain health, as well as things found in research that could potentially be detrimental. So based on an individual's intake of these foods, their diet was assigned a score out of 15. And just as kind of an example, one study showed that the people with the highest mind scores were found to be, it was like they were 7.5 years younger than the people with the lowest mind scores, which is fairly significant. So that's encouraging. Now let's go into a few more specifics about what does this mind diet look like then? What should you be eating? Well, there's 10 foods that are encouraged on the mind diet. They're as follows. The green leafy vegetables, the ideal intake is greater than 6 servings per week. All other vegetables, the goal was at least 1 serving per day. Berries, notice they focus on berries specifically, not all fruit, but berries in greater than 2 servings per week. Nuts and seeds, greater than 5 servings per week is the ideal. Legumes, greater than 3 servings. Poultry, greater than 2 servings per week. Fish, greater than 1 serving per week. Whole grains, greater than or equal to 3 per day. Olive oil, they just scored whether it was the primary oil used or not. And wine was actually included at an intake level of 1 glass per day. So those are the foods that are encouraged and gave you points. And then the 5 foods that are discouraged on the mind diet are as follows. And at these intake levels, you are also given additional points. So butter and margarine, less than a tablespoon per day. Cheese, less than or equal to 1 serving per week. Red meat, less than 4 servings per week. Fried or fast foods, less than 1 time per week. And pastries and sweets, less than 5 servings per week. Okay, so they found that it works, or it appears to work. And in terms of why it works, there's several theories. Going back to that inflammation theory, we've got the potential anti-inflammatory effects of these diets. In other words, they're putting out the inflammation fire. This can be happening from a variety of components of these diets. For example, the abundance of plant foods that are included provide a huge variety of antioxidants. These antioxidants are also called polyphenols, so I'll be using that word a few more times. And these polyphenols can have direct antioxidant effects in the body as well. They also have the power to turn on the body's production of its own antioxidant systems, which are actually even more powerful than the antioxidants that we get from the plant foods specifically. So double effect there. The omega-3 fats from the seafoods included are also anti-inflammatory, as are the unsaturated fats from the olive oil, the nuts and seeds, avocado. The diet minimizes pro-inflammatory things like saturated fats, trans fats, excess sugar, salt, and chemicals from highly processed foods. The abundance of the nutrients, in other words, the vitamins and the minerals, simply coming from the nutrient-dense real food that you're getting from these diets, supports the body's own anti-inflammatory and metabolic processes. In other words, a well-nourished body just runs better. And then finally, the diets tend to be low glycemic, which means they're supportive of good blood sugar levels and high in minerals. So this supports blood sugar and blood pressure management, again, which then have effects on the body's state of inflammation. So very anti-inflammatory from that perspective, from all those perspectives. And then also, if we look at how these diets can affect gut health and support gut health, I think that's another key component that's important. Much research is starting to show a connection between gut health, brain health, and mood. And if you can see the picture on the side, I tried to include a picture that sort of showed this. There's this constant two-way communication happening all the time between the gut and the brain, where substances produced in one affect the functioning of the other. So a healthy gut contributes to a healthy brain, and then an unhealthy gut contributes to a less healthy brain. Gut permeability is one key indicator of gut health. You don't want excess permeability because this can increase body and brain inflammation. Bacterial balance in the gut is another key indicator, where too many bad bacteria, or an imbalance or dysbiosis as we call it, can also lead to increased inflammation. So getting back to how these diets work, they're very supportive of good gut health in the sense of, first of all, they provide abundant fiber from all the different plant foods that are encouraged. This feeds the good bacteria, acts as what we call a prebiotic food for the bacteria in the gut, and supports their many positive activities. One of these positive activities is producing something called butyrate. Butyrate improves our intestinal health because it feeds the cells directly and keeps them less inflamed, so the intestine is less permeable. And butyrate also has anti-inflammatory actions in the body and the brain. So the fiber is really important. The abundant polyphenol provision from the plant foods, in addition to the antioxidant effects, it seems that they also interact with the gut bacteria to help the good ones grow. And then in turn, actually, these bacteria then help us to use those antioxidants. They help us absorb them because a lot of them are difficult to absorb. And then our body can use them for their antioxidant and other effects. And then simply the limited sugar intake on the diets helps reduce that bacterial imbalance that can result, or that dysbiosis. So that's anti-inflammatory as well. There's a couple other mechanisms that could potentially be at work. Improved blood flow is one of them. Some of the polyphenols provided in these diets do have the ability to improve blood flow in the whole body, and this includes the brain. This just increases nutrient delivery and optimizes function. And then it's also been shown that some components of these diets, for example, the omega-3 fats and the polyphenols, can actually have direct effect on neurotransmitters, which are the brain's communication molecules. So if they moderate them in a positive way, then they can maybe have good effects from that mechanism as well. So now I think we're starting to get a picture of why the Mediterranean style or the MIND diets can be supportive in so many different ways. I wanted to spend this slide giving you a few more notable food mentions, just because these specific foods are not scored specifically, and I don't think any of them Mediterranean or MIND diet scoring, but at the same time, the brain research is definitely full of information on other very specific foods, and these three foods show up quite frequently, so I did want to give them the honorable mentions. And again, they're rich in those polyphenols. So they are the green and regular teas, cocoa and dark chocolate, and turmeric. So the green teas contain catechins in high amounts, called, one particular is called EGCG, which has been found to be particularly helpful to support certain aspects of brain health. Same with cocoa and dark chocolate. Contains certain polyphenols found to support learning and memory. It also boosts mood. The darker the chocolate, the better usually, because that will limit the amount of added sugar that comes with it. And then turmeric, which is the spice of the moment, contains curcumin, which has also been shown to have several benefits for the brain, including an increased growth of new brain cells in the hippocampus, which is the one area of the brain that actually can regenerate and grow new brain cells. It's also a key brain area involved in learning and memory, so it's very important for aging well. So that turmeric can be helpful there. Okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the ketogenic diet, shift gears a little bit. Hopefully, a couple minutes. So this diet, I just wanted to mention, it's a diet that's very low in carbohydrates, high in fat, and modest in protein. It induces a state of ketosis in the body where ketones are produced from fat as an alternate fuel source to glucose. And the brains can use ketones for energy. This diet historically has been used for many years as a management strategy for epilepsy that doesn't respond well to medication. And more recently, there's been an interest in using it as a strategy for managing conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Some studies do actually show improvement in symptoms for both conditions, as well as for mild to moderate cognitive impairment. So what does the ketogenic diet look like, and how does it compare to these other diets? It's definitely got some differences. The Mediterranean diets are certainly not low carb, high fat, but it's also got some surprising similarities, like the emphasis on a lot of nuts and seeds and non-starchy vegetables that would be containing like that fiber and those polyphenols. It's got, you can include a lot of olives and olive oil and avocado. So there's definitely some similarities, but as you can see, the foods avoided are basically anything high carb, which includes those whole grains and legumes, and some of the starchy vegetables that are included on the other diets. And then some of the foods eaten liberally certainly do contain more saturated fat than is found on the other diets, like the butter and the heavy cream and the hard cheeses. Okay. So despite the fact that it's a very different approach in some ways to the Mediterranean style and line diets, it's been shown to have multiple neuroprotective or brain protecting effects anyways, and they appear to happen by increased energy production, anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects, and modifying the action of some neurotransmitters. The anti-inflammatory effects, or those fire extinguisher effects, seem to happen because the use of ketones for energy versus glucose reduces the overall oxidative stress in the cell. If you can imagine the process of metal oxidizing when it's exposed to air and water, or rusting basically, you can imagine that there's similar processes that go on in the body all the time that are kind of akin to that oxidation. So if the body's not constantly dealing with them, then you get damage over time. So the use of ketones can reduce that stress level. It also induces the detoxification systems that the body has, which are meant to deal with that oxidative damage. The diet stimulates production of more mitochondria, which are the energy-producing parts of the cell, and ketones also have anti-inflammatory and calming effects on the immune system. Now, it's not without risks. It's a very, very restrictive diet, and there's a high risk of malnutrition associated with following it. It's worthy to note that the elderly and people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are already at higher risk of malnutrition. The elderly are also at high risk for loss of muscle mass, and the ketogenic diet does make it hard to get adequate protein. You definitely need to do a lot of intentional planning, and being very restrictive, it's also hard to make it a long-term sustainable option. So these risks are important considerations for anybody that would be considering it. So overall, conclusions that I've come to through all of this is that there seems to be some key diet factors that seem important regardless of what diet pattern you're choosing to follow, and they seem to be the antioxidants, like the polyphenols, and the ability of the diet to support good gut health. These are key anti-inflammatory mechanisms that seem to be working for you, regardless of which one you choose. It seems that the Mediterranean, DASH, and MIND diets are probably the best options we know of at this point for prevention and slowing the progression of most types of brain decline, and they're definitely the lowest risk. And they generally work over a period of years. If someone was interested in trying the ketogenic diet, it might be a good option to try if someone already has a diagnosed condition and significant symptoms. They're looking for faster effects, but it should be, taken with some caution, and that person should be assessed and followed by a nutrition professional if at all possible, just because of the high risk of nutrient inadequacy and muscle loss associated with the diet. So basically, that's what I've got. I don't know if time-wise you wanted to allow a couple questions or just move right into the next one.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Suzanne. I think we'll have to move to the next speaker right now. I know we're just slightly short on time. I do have a couple of questions that have come through the chat box, so I'll continue to populate those. If those don't get answered by the other speakers, then we'll try to carve out some time at the very end to answer some of these questions. So thank you very much for all of that information. I will now pass it over to a colleague of mine and the founding director of the BC Brain Wellness Program, Dr. Silke Cresswell. So Dr. Cresswell wears many different hats at UBC, but those include the program director of the BC Brain Wellness Program, a movement disorder specialist at the Pacific Parkinson's Research Center, and associate professor at UBC. She has a very wide range of different research avenues, and today she'll be speaking about the recent advancements in nutrition and microbiome research in Parkinson's disease. So over to you, Dr. Cresswell.
Well, thank you very much, and it's so lovely to have you all here, so a very warm welcome. I'm going to steer the conversation slightly away from the pure diet perspective to the microbiome as well. And as we'll soon see, they're actually related quite closely. And we'll focus on Parkinson's disease for this talk. And now it should actually advance, which it doesn't. There we go. So you probably all have heard of what the microbiome does, and this has been a very popular topic, but just to create a level playing field for everybody, it is a fairly newly discovered organ. I mean, we knew all along that the inside of the gut and many other surfaces of our bodies are, of course, densely populated by microbes. But we only really realized in the last 10 or so years how vitally important they are for us. They live, as I said, in and on us. They consist of bacteria, of viruses, of fungi, of archaea, there are some others as well. They actually, if you were to put them all together, they would weigh as much as the human brain. And the highest density of those microbes is found in the colon. And they actually do a lot of services for us. So they defend us from pathogens, so those harmful microbes. So we've got the good and the bad guys. They break down nutrients from the food we're eating. They produce hormones. They have other metabolically active metabolites that are used for messaging in the body. They produce vitamins. So for example, vitamin B12 or vitamin K. They also process, of course, not just our diet that comes in, but also everything else. So for example, pesticides, any medications we're taking, pollutants, etc. They have a big influence on gut motility and gut function. They train the immune system. They're actually vitally important for that. And I could go into long stories about that, but they influence brain and behavior as well. And there are many factors that influence how this microbiome is composed. So what makes up the individual microbiome that we carry? And it starts actually with the method of birth. It makes a difference whether you are born by a vaginal delivery or by C-section. And nowadays, knowing that, there are studies and practices to actually give kids born by C-section a swab over the nose and mouth from the mother's vagina and rectal region so that they get populated properly. It's influenced by our host genetics. So we, as what we assume is to be completely human, that is influencing what harbors and hosts in terms of microbiome. The health status is really important. Age, of course, is important. Your lifestyle is important. If we use antibiotics for any infection in the body, that usually has an effect on our gut microbiome as well. Other medications can have an influence. And one of the really biggest influences is actually diet. And we'll get back to that later because obviously the two are closely linked. There are many, many conditions linked to the gut microbiome, and this list of conditions is actually growing. And it's, as you would expect, you would think, well, obviously it's conditions that have something to do with digestion or the liver or colon cancer, obesity, metabolic syndrome, how we produce and use energy. and of course inflammatory bowel diseases. But it turns out even things like asthma or the tendency to have allergies, cardiovascular disease, those are related to the microbiome too. And then in more recent years, we have realized more and more that a lot of the brain disorders are actually linked to the gut microbiome as well. And that includes depression, anxiety, autism, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's disease, and very prominently actually Parkinson's disease. Of all of those conditions, it is probably Parkinson's that has the best and most and the strongest links to the gut and the gut microbiome. And we're going to dive right into that. So I'm going to cut straight to the chase and what we think is happening, but there are many question marks and we need to figure out the exact mechanisms that are happening. But here's the model. We now need to do the research to really confirm and understand all these steps. So a lot of Parkinson's probably somehow starts in the gut. And what we're thinking is happening is that nutritions, toxins, medications, infections come in through our mouth or through the nose. That is another alternative, the kind of fast spread. Come in through the mouth, it goes down through the esophagus, stomach, goes into our gut, where of course we have the intestinal microbes. And then these factors, nutritions, toxins, medications, infections, together with the microbes that are in the gut, then determine whether there is intestinal inflammation and whether this leads to a leaky gut. So the barrier function of the gut lining not working properly, and that means that there's more inflammation, which Suzanne just mentioned. She had already introduced a lot of the concepts that I'm going to repeat here, so that has been very useful. So you have a leaky gut, and that also means that toxins and microbes can actually enter the body and the gut wall more easily. That then somehow leads to the deposition of alpha-synuclein, which is one of the key dysregulated proteins in Parkinson's disease. And that alpha-synuclein, they are little fibrils, they're like little needles that don't resolve anymore. Usually alpha-synuclein, we have it, everybody has it, we have lots of it, should be soluble. But in this case, they become little needles and they're not soluble anymore. We can find them in the gut, and then they can spread either via the vagus nerve, which is this nerve that connects the gut and the brain in a two-way system. It can spread to the brain. And another path, so that's path one, that's the synucleinopathy, or it can lead to systemic inflammation, which then also means that the barrier function of the blood-brain barrier, which protects the brain from all influences from outside, also doesn't work properly anymore, and we get inflammation in the brain itself. In addition, as we will see, there are probably toxins that can enter the circulation and the body, and they can then also be found in the brain. Now, a lot of work needs to be done to prove this hypothesis and all the different pieces, but this is where it stands right now, and that leads us to a project that we're doing. It's an ongoing project in Vancouver. The papers that I'm going to talk about, the results that I'm going to talk about are the ones that we've done from the first analysis of data. This is all led by our PhD student, Mihai Sirsti. This was published in Movement Disorders, the leading journal in the field of movement disorder neurology last year, so in 2020. And so we looked at, in the meantime, over 300 participants, and nearly 200 of them with Parkinson's and about 100 healthy controls. And we did a very detailed clinical assessment to everybody who's on the call and who has participated. Thank you very much. We could not do this without you. And you will see why it is so important that we actually do this detailed assessment. So detailed clinical assessment. Then we take samples, fecal samples, swabs from the nose, swabs from the mouth, blood samples. We take We do a metabolomic analysis of the blood, so that is looking at the chemical fingerprint of all the biological processes in the body, and we're also looking at inflammation markers in the blood. And so what we as a group, it's very much a team approach, found is that when you look at all or the most common bacteria in the gut microbiome, and they are listed here, this is all the different bacteria, they like to hang out in groups called clusters here. Cluster A are the good guys, and cluster A is more present in the healthy controls, as we see here, that's higher, and they are less present in people who have Parkinson's, PD. Then there's cluster B. Well, they are unfortunately the bad guys. They are lower in healthy controls, and they are higher in Parkinson's disease. And that difference, although there's overlap, is actually highly significant. Now, why is cluster A, why are those the good guys, other than that we find them more in people who do not have Parkinson's? Well, they actually produce butyrate. And butyrate, you might recall, was just mentioned as one of the short-chain fatty acids, the short-chain fatty acids being important for calming inflammation, and it is made from fiber in the diet, and we need the bacteria to then produce butyrate as one of the short-chain fatty acids, and that's what cluster A does, the good guys. And the butyrate producers in people who don't have Parkinson's are higher than in people who do. Now, we also did the metabolomics, the metabolites, and we looked specifically at products that are made by the bacteria. So they're made by the gut bacteria, and we can find them in our own blood. And so we measured those different metabolites, and there were two that stood out. They're called Precrystal and acetylglutamine. Don't worry about the names, but we found more of them in people who had Parkinson's compared to people who were healthy controls. And that also correlated with our cluster B. So the more of the bad guys cluster B you had, the more of the Precrystal and the phenylacetylglutamine was present. And those are understood to be toxins and not good for us. So what we're thinking is happening is that in Parkinson's disease, there's a lot of constipation that is present early on, that can be present 20 years or longer before any other symptoms of Parkinson's develop. So constipation means it takes longer for anything to get actually through the gut. It often also comes with irritable bowel symptoms. This is associated with changes in the gut microbiota, associated then again, because the gut microbiota are now changed, we have more cluster B, less cluster A. They produce these toxic metabolites, and they unfortunately produce less of the short-chain fatty acids, the butyrate, which is the good stuff. That leads to increased local inflammation, which again leads to damage to the lining and function of the gut. And now with the reduced function, we have more constipation, etc. All of that then also leads to both systemic as well as brain effects, and that includes, again, inflammation as well as those toxic metabolites. Now, we're going to add nutrition to all of that, because we just heard diet is one of the most potent influential factors on the gut microbiome. And if you compare the non-Western diets, all the good stuff that Suzanne just talked about, and the Western diet being fried food, processed food, sugars, white flour, sweets, red meat, full-fat dairy, high salt, so all that stuff, that has, independently of the good things, the Western diet unfortunately has a really bad effect on our poor microbes that we have in the gut. So again, we get less of the good butyrate, and we have more anxiety, more depression. If we compare that to something really yummy looking, like the MIND diet, which is one of the Mediterranean diets, which, as Suzanne already reviewed, so a lot of the lovely green stuff, seeds, nuts, berries, beans, whole grains, fish, poultry, olive oil, then what we find, and that was already mentioned, so just briefly to recap here, there is quite a bit of evidence that this Mediterranean type eating pattern prevents cognitive decline or slows it down through various potential mechanisms. And we then also looked at Parkinsonism and Parkinson's disease. There have been way less studies out there looking at Parkinson's, and those who adhered highly to the Mediterranean diet actually had a reduced risk to develop Parkinson's and reduced symptoms of what we call prodromal Parkinson's disease. So that isn't actually Parkinson's yet, but it's the symptoms that would come in the years before then, like depression, constipation, acting out your dreams, that sort of thing. There's one study that would also suggest that healthy eating with patterns similar to the Mediterranean diet will slow disease progression. And so that brings us to a study that was actually published last week, again, in movement disorders, led by Avril Metcalf-Roche, another one of our PhD students. And we found, and that is the same cohort that I just talked about, who did the microbiome study, when we looked at their diet data, the people who were adhering to a Mediterranean type diet, either the MIND diet or the GMedi diet, more closely, so in the top third here, they were quite a bit older when they got their Parkinson's than the people who were not eating healthily. And that was a very significant difference. And that difference was a mean of about 8 years. And so for the men, it was 8 years. And we see that here in the blue boxes. And for the women, that difference was a whopping 17 years. So high diet adherence, people were about 17 years older than people who had low diet adherence. And there was also higher inflammation, CRP being an inflammatory marker, in those who ate poorly, and less inflammation in those who ate better. Now, in summary, to recap, the gut is very closely connected to brain function, much closer than we thought for many, many years. The microbes play a very key role in this relationship, particularly in Parkinson's disease. And when you're eating healthy, you feed yourself, your gut microbiome, and your brain. And in future, of course, we want to investigate mechanisms and connections of the diet and the microbiome as it pertains to brain health. If you're interested in that, we always need healthy controls, and of course, people with Parkinson's and other brain disorders. And we're really looking, with a brain wellness program paired with that research arm, we're really looking to come full circle. So to have brain wellness from growing our own food, and I know Joanna is on the call who does our growing food, to preparing wholesome and delicious meals, and I will hand over to the people who are experts for that in a second, to a healthy gut microbiome and a well-nourished brain. With that, I say a big thank you to all our study participants. We could not have done any of that without you. And of course, this is a massive team approach, and I thank everybody who's on the team, our collaborators and our funders. And with that, I will hand over to Darren.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Silke. That was fantastic. That was a great summary of all the fantastic research coming out of UBC and the Parkinson's Center, as well as the BC Brain Wellness Program. So as Dr. Cresswell mentioned, we are looking to implement some of that work as well, and starting to roll out our research program with the BC Brain Wellness Program. So please stay tuned for that. Now, our last speaker of the day is going to take us home and show us how we can implement some of this research and some of the practical tips into our day-to-day life. He's Chef Darren Clay. Darren is a chef at UBC Food Services and working on various initiatives to bring local and sustainable food and healthy options to students and staff. So prior to his time at UBC, he did some apprenticing with the Fairmont Hotels in Vancouver and different establishments throughout Singapore. And he learned some of the efficiency and systems with the Cactus Club Cafe, and worked as the executive culinary chef at the Pacific Institute of Culinary Arts on Granville Island. So welcome, Chef, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to kind of talk about how you're going to implement brain healthy foods into your house, into your diet, and offer you hopefully some good suggestions. Sorry, as I so healthy eating, as you can see, is a combination of some foods that you may be aware of, such as some healthy oils. So avocado oil, olive oils, of course, nut oils. And it's a good idea to have a variety of, in my house, a variety of olive oils. So you want those olive oils high, the extra virgin olive oils high in the polyphenols. So if you have a nice olive oil, it should have that kind of sharp, peppery kind of flavor. And then you know you're getting a lot of those healthy polyphenols from your olive oil. Lots of legumes is also a very important aspect to introduce, especially if you can buy dry. So those are also very important, where you rehydrate them yourself. Less salt, less preservatives, things like chickpeas, lentils, black beans, navy beans, etc. Nuts and seeds. A little chef tip for your nuts, your seeds, if you can, please store them in the refrigerator, the freezer, because they do have oils in them. It just prolongs the life. And then before you're going to cook with them, it's always a good idea to toast them, because that really brings out the flavor as well. Whole grains. So introducing whole grains, very important. Brown rice, barley, of course, quinoa, which has been very popular over the last, say, 10 years or so. Farro, millet, all of these whole grains are fantastic. And then the probiotics for your gut health, as was talked about from both of our other speakers. Yogurt, kefir, things like kombucha, miso, sauerkraut, kimchi. So any pickles at all, and vinegars, etc., are really great in that respect. The leafy greens, which were also talked about. So very important, kale, spinach, arugula, chard, those kinds of things. Basically, I always think you should have a green vegetable pretty much every day as part of your vegetable intake, as well as others. Of course, avocados, a fantastic, healthy fat. And then one that's starting to gain some popularity, a food that you should try to introduce in your diet, especially here on the West Coast, but is seaweed. So I think you're going to see a lot of people, and you're going to see seaweed incorporated in a lot more diets. It's completely sustainable, incredibly healthy for you. And it has been used, of course, for a long, long time in other cultures. But I think we'll see it more in North America being introduced. And there are some great chefs doing some very interesting work with seafood already. So just kind of keep that open and try to incorporate a little bit of seaweed into your diet as well. And then some good news. I mean, those are things that people are used to seeing. Some good things as well, as was talked about, which is coffee. So that makes me very happy to hear, because I'm a big fan of that in moderation. And of course, chocolate, which was talked about. So dark chocolate, fantastic. That can be considered a nice healthy option. And really, really important is, of course, water. Lots of water all the time, throughout the day, and incorporate it into your diet. So there's also some people are curious about organics and how to incorporate organics. So if you do want to incorporate organics into your diet, it can be cost prohibitive for some people. And so there's always a good chart that they call the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And this is a way to slowly introduce. So the Dirty Dozen are basically, if you're going to buy organic, these are the ones you would want to buy. As opposed to the Clean 15, less pesticides are used in the production and growing of these fruits and vegetables. So this is a good kind of starting point. If you don't want to go 100% organic, you could slowly introduce some from the Dirty Dozen side into your diet. As far as how you introduce these into your diet, I would say it's really important to have a nicely stocked pantry. So the way that we our attitude here at UBC Food Services when we're feeding the students is we want to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And so with a well-stocked pantry, then it makes it easy on you to make that healthy choice. So when I say a well-stocked pantry, in my house, a variety of oils, as I already referenced, a variety of vinegars, different flavored vinegars. So if you're making your own vinaigrettes, etc., you have some nice variety in your diet. Lots of grains, lots of legumes, dried legumes, especially because the shelf life. But if not, canned is fine, just to get them in your diet. Then things like nuts and seeds. Canned tomatoes are a staple in my house all the time. And then as far as fresher things, onions, garlic, ginger, lemons are also staples that I have in my pantry. Turmeric was mentioned already from Suzanne, which is really fantastic, and it's gaining in popularity in North America, which is great. And now you can actually buy jars of fresh turmeric puree, which is very easy to incorporate into food. Also, ways to implement these foods is to kind of have a meal plan. So set up a time at the beginning of the week, plan your meals for the week. And what I do, I have a very busy household. I have 5 children. So it's a master of organization. So we have to do a lot of batch cooking, and this will save you so much time. So what I mean by batch cooking can be roasting off. You're going to heat your oven up anyway. So roast off a variety of vegetables. You can have them for dinner that night and then package them up and eat them throughout the week. And also using these items on multiple days is a great idea. So you may want to have some salmon and brown rice with some green vegetables for dinner one night. Cook extra salmon, cook extra brown rice or extra grains. And something that's very popular now that I'm sure you've seen around are these power bowls. And so the next day you could take that leftover rice and incorporate some grains. I always incorporate vegetables into my bowls, some grains, some seeds, and I like something pickled in there as well. It adds, obviously we're trying to always think about contrasting flavors and textures when we make food. So that just makes it a little more interesting to eat. Plus the pickles are all those things are good for you, and you'll have them around in your pantry already. And you could take the salmon and then make salmon burgers the next day or something like that. So it's this idea of not necessarily having to cook fresh every single day, where you have all of these items in your pantry. And then, for me, it's really, I love food. And so you have to remember to enjoy it, right? One thing I was really happy to see with the revamped Canada Food Guide was they kind of talked about these other aspects about enjoying food with other people, and enjoying food, period. So don't be afraid to treat yourself. It's important that you have a diet, but moderation, I believe, is the key. And that's what you'll find in those Mediterranean diets is the portion sizes are smaller, less protein. I spent some time in Asia, and that's definitely a big takeaway when I cooked in Asia is you see the amount of protein is far less than what we're accustomed to here in North America. So it's not that they don't have it, they just eat less of it. And that's kind of part of the philosophy at UBC Food Services is we have a term that you might hear more often now, which is plant forward. And plant forward, what that means is it doesn't mean no protein. It doesn't mean no animal proteins. It's just not the main component. I grew up in central Alberta, so you started your plate with that piece of steak, and then everything else was kind of whatever you could fit in on the corner of your plate. Obviously, that has changed, and our philosophy here when we design menus is those grains, those vegetables are the main component, and then the protein is really kind of maybe tertiary from there. So enjoy your food and treat yourself every once in a while to something that you enjoy. And I think those things are a good starting point anyway.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Darren. We do have 2 minutes. There's been a number of questions throughout the session here. So I'm just going to put all of the speakers into the spotlight, and then I'll run through as many as we can get through in the next 2 minutes. I'll just mention that this session has been recorded. We will be posting it on our website and our YouTube channel. So if you've missed some of the things, you've missed some of the foods or whatnot, you'll have an opportunity to go back and see them there, and then you can revisit the session as well, because I know we went over a lot of things. The first question that came up, I think this will be for Darren and Suzanne, was about alcohol intake. Does red or white wine matter? And obviously that will be within moderation as well.
Suzanne, do you have? My guess would be that it would both be okay, but
yeah, I don't think the Mind Diet score specifically differentiated. My thought is that red wine might have some benefits because of the resveratrol. It's one of the key polyphenols that has some brain benefits that you don't get from too many other foods. But the Mind Diet did not differentiate as far as I can tell.
Excellent. And
moderation
one last
is key,
question. Absolutely. One last question. Are there any tests to check gut health?
It's probably for me, I take it.
On the panel?
Yeah. You can go ahead.
So I would say at this particular point in time, I know there are companies out there that offer you for several $100 offer to analyze your gut microbiome. Although you might get some general idea, there is so much variability between individuals and what is considered normal that it's not a test that is going to say, well, you have this. It might potentially, depending on the company, I can't speak to the specific companies, it might potentially say you have more of the pro-inflammatory bugs, but it depends entirely what is actually being analyzed. And in the field of Parkinson's, which is probably of the brain disorders, the one that is furthest advanced in terms of microbiome, role of microbiome and the brain, we still don't, there's not a set of microbes that, we know always causes X, but rather there are certain players that come up over and over again. There's one paper so far from a Chinese group with just under 50 patients, so that's fairly small. We had 300. That looks at a very high resolution analysis of the microbiome, and they came up with a combination of microbes that would predict that somebody already has Parkinson's. But we are not at a place yet where we can offer this as a general test. The hope, though, is that in future, maybe through a combination of microbes, of who's there, what they're producing, that we can actually develop such a test, that we can hopefully have such a test to look at people way before any changes actually reach the brain, but when this is still at the level of the gut. Because if we could intervene at that stage, now that would be much easier in terms of prevention than having to treat an already existing brain disorder. So that's the hope for the future, the holy grail, so to speak. But don't waste your money right now to order that from private companies.
Sounds great. Well, it really shows the importance of research, and hopefully where some of the research is going, and the importance to really invest in the research. So with that, we have run slightly over time. I want to thank all the speakers, Dr. Cresswell, Suzanne, Chef Clay, thank you very much for participating. All the participants who joined today's session, it was very well attended. We had nearly 150 people on the call today. So thank you very much for everybody. I apologize for not getting to all the questions. If you do have follow-up questions, feel free to send them to our general inbox. And just a reminder, our classes are open for our winter 2021 session. Classes are filling up, so if you're still interested in registering for some of those classes, please visit our website and sign up now. We will be also launching a spring and summer sessions in the future as well, so keep your eyes peeled for that. With that, thank you very much and have a wonderful start to your year. Bye for now.
Cheers.